So let's talk about configuring and securing a Windows file server in PowerShell. Now we're going to start by making sure that our Windows feature is installed. So I'm going to do get Windows feature, and I'm going to pipe that to more. And the one we're looking at is right here, file server. Now, this is installed for me because we've already done DHCP, DNS, and Active Directory, which is the one that actually enabled file serving. We put Active Directory on here. So that has already installed our file server. Now, if it is not, then what we do is we just install Windows feature, and we're using this feature name fs-file server. Now, all this other stuff that we can add to it, so data deduplication, DFS, FSRM, iSCSI, all of these are additional things that we would need to install if we were going to use them. But just using a standard file server, we actually don't need any of those. Now, let's take a look at our commands to manage it. If you remember correctly, the basis of Windows file serving is the Server Message Block Protocol, or SMB. So all of our commands for managing it are in a module named SMB Share. And I'm going to go ahead and pipe that to more as well. And here are all of my commands for managing this. Now, you can see we can close SMB open files, SMB sessions. We can get SMB client configurations. One that I want to point out to you right away is going to be get SMB server configuration. And I'm pointing that out because we're going to be looking at configuring our server and adding some security to it, and then looking at some security settings that are already set. Now that's paired with set SMB server configuration, which is how we modify it. All right, so that's fairly straightforward. Let's take a look at our server configuration options. So it's get SMB server configuration. Pipe that to more, and there are a couple of things we're going to point out here that are security related. Now, key thing before we dive into this, I am running on Windows Server 2019. So if you're running on an older server, some of these default settings might be a little bit different. So it pays to come in and look and not just trust that the defaults are what we expect them to be. So here are two of them, Auto Share Server and Auto Share Workstation. Both of them are set to true. What this is about is the SMB server will automatically share, based on whether it's a workstation or a server, will automatically share a couple of things, and we may or may not want that. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. Let's take a look at another setting here, enable SMB1 protocol. Now the SMB1 protocol, there are some security issues, and so a recommendation is don't use it. So in Server 2019, it's turned off by default. You can turn it back on. The only reason you would ever want to do that is if you have some older clients that can't connect using SMBv1. So that would be where you might want to turn that back on. If you're not using that, your best bet is to go ahead and turn that off. Now, there's a couple of others here that are kind of helpful. Let's look at this one right here, encrypt data. This is currently set to false. So by default, we're not encrypting data when we're sending back and forth. However, you see here we do require a security signature, and we're set to reject unencrypted access. Additionally, we are hiding our server by default. So those are a handful, and obviously there are other things you might want to look at as you go through here, but those are a handful of ones that are kind of important for security. So how do we change them? Well, let's start by setting it to encrypt data. So what we're going to do is we're going to say set SMB server configuration dash encrypt data, and this was a true or false, so we're going to say $true, and that tells it use the Boolean value for true. Now it pops up and says, do you want to confirm this action? We're going to say yes, we do. And now if we do get SMB server configuration, let's go ahead and pipe that through more again. We're going to see that our encrypt data right here is set to true. Now, something to be aware of. This actually doesn't take effect right now. I've made the change, but it does not take effect yet. It doesn't take effect until I restart the service. Now, we were also talking about that AutoShare server and AutoShare workstation. Okay, what those do is they create some shares for us automatically. So I'm going to do get SMB share to see what we're currently sharing. Now remember, I haven't actually shared anything. All of this is happening automatically. So these three are shared from, well, these two, netlog and sysvol, are shared from Active Directory. No Active Directory running, no syslog, no volume. The default share and the remote admin, these are those auto shares. IPC is another one that we use for communication between devices. So I can turn off a couple of those if I want to. And the way we do that is by using the command set smb server configuration. And then I want to turn off the auto share server. So I'm going to set that to $false. And then I'm going to turn off the auto share workstation. I'm going to set that to $false. Now again, this is going to prompt me and say, are you sure you want to do that? Now if I'm doing this in a script, I might not want that. So what I do is I turn off the confirmation. And the way we do that is by dash confirm colon $false. Now, the confirmation, you have to use that confirm to set whether it's true or false. But if I do that, it no longer asks me for confirmation. Just remember, for the properties that we're setting the value for, we don't have to use a colon, but for the confirmation we do. So I'm going to do another get smb server configuration and pipe that to more, and now we'll look and see that our AutoShare server and our AutoShare workstation are currently set to false. But if I do get SMB share, you'll see that they're still shared. Well, they're still shared, kind of like the other settings, because we need to restart this service in order to get these changes to take effect. One other thing before we do that real quick. In doing so, we're going to take away this admin and this C share. Now, that may be something that you want to do for security. However, you might be running different functions or applications that actually take advantage of those shares. So if that's the case, you might not be able to do that. So just keep that in mind. When you disable those, if something stops working, they might be taking advantage of those default Windows shares, so you might have to re-enable them. Okay, let me restart service. And this is actually called the LAN-MAN server. It's an old name for it. But it's the LAN-MAN server is the name of the service. So we want to restart that. The problem is we can't because it has dependent services. In other words, I can't restart this because I have other services that depend on it. It's actually not a huge deal. It actually tells you how to fix it. It says right here, it can only be stopped if the force flag is set. Okay, cool. So let's do a dash force. And that will force it to shut down. It's going to shut down the dependent service as well. And you'll see this right here, waiting for service net logon to start. That's our dependent service. So it had to restart both of them, and that's what that whole warning was about. But now if I do a get SMB share, you're going to see that we don't have that admin and that root of C share. Those have been removed because our settings have now taken effect. All right, so that's how you can view your SMB server configuration and then modify it. Now at this point, we've only looked at server configuration. We haven't looked at any shares yet, which is frequently what we think of when we think about setting up a file server. This has just been managing the configuration of the server itself. In our next video, we're going to look at dealing with shares.